Hello and welcome to the Preventing Staff Burnout Part 2 training video. If you have not yet viewed Part 1, please make sure to view that training before proceeding with Part 2. As a disclaimer, the content in this training is supported by grant number 15 POVC 23 GG 00248 BRND, which was awarded by the Office for Victims of Crime under the U.S. Department of Justice. The opinions, findings, conclusions, and recommendations expressed in this video are those of the Michigan Coalition to End Domestic and Sexual Violence staff and do not necessarily reflect the views of the U.S. Department of Justice. Our objectives for this training are to help you recognize how burnout impacts staff and the barriers for community care, and identify key strategies to mitigate and prevent staff burnout. Prior training, we spent a bit of time discussing community care, and during this next portion, we want to take a look at how burnout impacts staff and what creates those barriers for cultivating community care. In order to consider our topic today more thoroughly, we want to have a shared definition of horizontal hostility. Horizontal hostility occurs when members of a targeted group believe, act on, or enforce the dominant system of discrimination and oppression. We can think about horizontal hostility as what happens when we're facing poor conditions, whether workplace harm, policies, funding-related impacts, oppression, and shifting blame to one another rather than on the systemic cause of the oppression. With the definition of horizontal hostility in mind, let's pause here to reflect on the four terms shared on the slide: transparency, respect, psychological safety, and work-related supports, in order to consider three questions. When it comes to horizontal hostility, why do you think these key terms are important? What do we as leaders not have control over? For example, funder decisions regarding potential cuts. And lastly, how does this relate to personal communication style, conflict style, leadership style, lived experiences, policy, and procedure across our organizations? Now that you've taken some time to consider, did thoughts about the need for transparency, accountability, and communications come up? What about diverse strategies? Did you consider the impact of mission, vision, and values or other policy development, including organizational change management plans? Perhaps some of these considerations were on your mind, and there may be other ideas coming up. For the remainder of this webinar, we're going to consider several tools and strategies as part of mitigating and preventing burnout, beginning with considering hiring, retention, and work-related supports through economic justice. As we move through economic justice and horizontal hostility, we will work through an activity together. You will need the provided Economic Justice Action Plan template during this time. In the 2023 State of Crime Victim Advocacy in Michigan report by the Michigan Victim Advocacy Network, key concerns impacting employee retention were raised, like inadequate compensation, staffing shortage, and work overload to cover unfilled shifts or positions. We acknowledged in earlier discussions about how these factors might play a role in horizontal hostility and burnout. To explore solutions to this problem, pause this video to reflect on the following questions and write down your thoughts. Consider your current practices and the gaps you might notice. What does economic justice for staff mean to you within your agency? What are some of the things you do to promote this? For example, salary, benefits, flexible work schedule, pet or family-friendly policies, PTO, professional development opportunities, cost of living adjustments, or bonuses. What is in your control? What is not in your control, and why? How do you share what economic justice supports are available to your staff, and how often and in what ways? Who is receiving this information, and are there any gaps? How are you addressing those gaps on an ongoing basis? Are you ensuring staff of color and other marginalized identities are also included in your economic justice policy considerations? How? Now that you reflected on those questions, pause the video again to consider the following 3 questions. 1. What challenges are you noticing arising for your agency in implementing these policies and supports, and how might you overcome them? 2. Do you have strategies in place to ensure all employees, especially marginalized groups, have access to economic justice? How can you support those groups better? 3. Did you notice other gaps in your reflections? What actionable steps do you want to take to close them? Now that you've taken some time with the prior questions, considering barriers and gaps, this last step can be done now, or you can circle back to it later using the included Economic Justice Action Plan template. Again, you can pause now to complete it, or feel free to circle back later to consider the following areas noted on this slide. Current strengths. What is your agency doing well in terms of economic justice for staff? Areas for improvement. What aspects of economic justice need more attention or resources in your organization? Immediate actions. What steps can you take within your control to promote economic justice better? For example, improving communication about available benefits, creating better transparency on salary ranges, or advocating for new policies. And lastly, long-term goals. What are the long-term goals you hope to achieve for economic justice in your agency? And when you consider this question, also consider including who you need to collaborate with to meet the goals of economic justice. As we move into our last section, keep in mind the importance of ongoing conversations and evaluations around how economic justice and other workplace supports can impact burnout by addressing turnover on an ongoing basis, by addressing workload on staff, and by promoting community care in our workplaces. Also keep in mind that accountability is key for leadership and teams in creating a more inclusive and supportive work environment, and the Economic Action Plan template can support with this through immediate steps and long-term strategies. Our last section for this webinar will continue to identify strategic solutions in preventing staff burnout. So now that we've established how burnout impacts staff and the barriers for community care, we can shift our focus to our third and last objective for this training. We will identify strategic solutions that prevent staff burnout and focus on the necessity to work together in creating strategic solutions in order for organizations to thrive. So let's explore the practical application of community care with your organization. Again, feel free to pause this video and respond to the following questions. What are the values and core tenets of your organization? How do you use your organization values and core tenets to inform and cultivate agency policies? How are policies created in your organization? What is your process? Who is involved? How do you decide this and why? Now let's think beyond traditional hiring processes to create a more inclusive and diverse staff. This is an opportunity to practice living core tenets and values in how and by whom HR-related policy and procedures are created, carried out, and how they relate to creating safer work environments and reducing horizontal hostility. Hiring policies should be philosophically driven, have the culture of organization in focus, provide clear expectations for interviewee and interviewer, have diversity valued and embraced, and have evaluation of the process. We also want to have a well-established floor of expectations that all oncoming employees must start from. This provides accommodations for folks who face barriers to build an equitable workplace. So some questions to consider in updating hiring processes are, what is the current hiring process in your agency? Who is involved? Who is not? What is your interviewing and candidate evaluation process like? What factors are playing a key role in this process? And what do you value most or look for on a resume? Why and how did your team come to place value there? Keeping your reflections in mind, here are some of our recommendations for policies and practices that help prevent burnout by encouraging community care. Ethical communication is our effort to elicit the best in communications and interactions with other group members. It looks like listening when others speak, speaking non-judgmentally, speaking from your own experience and perspective, expressing your own thoughts, needs, and feelings, seeking to understand others rather than to be right or more ethical, avoiding speaking for others, for example, by characterizing what others have said without checking your understanding, or by universalizing your opinions, beliefs, values, and conclusions, assuming that everyone shares them. Managing your own personal boundaries by sharing only what you are comfortable sharing, respecting the personal boundaries of others, avoiding interrupting and side conversations, making sure that everyone has time to speak and that all members have relatively equal airtime if they want it. And some bystander actions for supporting these norms include: notice that something is happening. Decide that what is happening is a problem or is unacceptable. Determine that the problem or what is unacceptable in terms of the situation requires intervention to be resolved. Take responsibility for acting to address the problem or situation. And have the knowledge and ability to effectively and safely act to address the problem or situation. A question that often gets brought up here is, how do you talk about change and expectations, and when do you share this type of information? It's important to practice transparency and good communication as a way of developing better shared understanding among your team. So some things to consider: what are the different types of change that you experience within your agencies? Which of these issues are in your control, which are not? How often do you talk about approaching changes with the entire team? How are you sharing this information? Who has access? Who doesn't? How are staff responding to the changes? Are they informed versus uninformed changes? What options do you have for sharing different types of information? What has been working very well for your agency? What are some barriers for this? Do you have a change management plan? How is it constructed? Who is involved? What is the primary goal of the plan? How does it minimize horizontal hostility and burnout? To summarize, some of the ways you can support your staff include promoting a shared understanding of values and expectations on an ongoing basis, exhibiting and promoting healthy employee relationships and communications, providing regular supervision support, ensuring staff are aware of all their benefits and encourage them to use the benefits, sharing employee appreciations in diverse ways, promoting healthy boundaries and community care. If and when staff feel none of these supports are working for their well-being and for good survivor-centered efforts, they might feel it's time for them to make a change and find another job that might be more aligned with what they need for themselves. There are some practical organizational practice in addition to consider. These include ensuring there are measures in place for regular debriefing, allowing flexible work schedules and mental health days to promote work-life balance and to destigmatize occupational mental health struggles, having an open line of communication where employees can share perspectives or offer suggestions on policies or practices that may be harmful to their wellness. Where possible, working in teams and having supervision available to avoid isolation. Minimizing how often people are asked to stay overtime, are contacted outside of their work time, and or how often people are asked to work on their days off. Having comprehensive training and orientation for new employees and ongoing training, professional development, and supervision for all employees is an additional component to consider. To wrap up this training, both part 1 and part 2, let's review what we've covered. Stress happens in all jobs. and prolonged exposure to other people's trauma leads to secondary trauma, vicarious trauma, and compassion fatigue. When staff feel they don't have adequate supports to deal with this stress, it can lead to burnout and possibly staff not only leaving their jobs, but the movement altogether. Lastly, your organization can support its staff in both pursuing self-care opportunities as well as by cultivating community care practices within the organization's policies. Thank you so much for joining us. The Coalition can provide additional technical assistance to help support you. If you have questions or want additional resources, we're here to help. Thank you for your time, your commitment to survivors, and your dedication to ensuring that your services continue to evolve in ways that are meaningful, effective, and survivor-centered.